When Jessica Morgan spent her last dollar on a condemned lighthouse at a coastal town bankruptcy auction, it was a desperate gamble to provide shelter for her and her 7-year-old daughter after losing everything. Following her bitter divorce and the crushing debt that consumed their savings, she never imagined that behind a rusted door in the lighthouse basement, she would discover a fortified bunker containing meticulously preserved documents, security codes, and a presidential diary revealing the location of a $300 million gold reserve secretly established during the Cold War, a contingency fund hidden from Congress and the public for decades. A discovery that would make her the target of shadow government operatives, thrust her into high-stakes negotiations with Treasury officials and federal agents, and ultimately lead to a classified operation that would forever change how America manages its emergency financial resources. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The eviction notice arrived on a rainy Monday morning, tucked between a past-due electric bill and a letter from her daughter's school, as if its life-shattering contents were just another piece of ordinary mail. Notice of eviction. 14 days to vacate premises. Jessica Morgan stared at the bold red letters, feeling her world collapse as she stood in the tiny kitchen of her 2-bedroom apartment. Through the window, she could see the turbulent gray ocean that had been both a source of solace and painful reminder of better days. "Not now," Jessica whispered, scanning the document for any possible exception or extension. There wasn't one. The entire apartment complex had been sold to developers planning a luxury resort. All residents had 2 weeks to find new housing. No exceptions, no extensions. At 34, Jessica hadn't imagined she would be here, a single mother with a teaching degree, recently laid off when her school district faced budget cuts, and now facing homelessness in a rental market that seemed designed to exclude people exactly like her. She placed the eviction notice on the counter and took a deep breath, mentally calculating her options. Her savings had dwindled to just under $100 after months of covering basic expenses with no income. Her parents lived across the country and were struggling with medical bills of their own. Friends had already helped as much as they could during the initial weeks after she lost her job. Even her ex-husband, who had promised to support their daughter, had vanished to another state, his child support payments becoming increasingly sporadic before stopping altogether. Jessica moved to the living room window, gazing out at the lighthouse that stood sentinel on the rocky point beyond her apartment complex. For 5 years, it had been the backdrop to her life in this coastal town, where she'd moved hoping to start fresh after her divorce. Its beam sweeping over their apartment each night had always fascinated her daughter Lily, who called it their nighttime guardian. Now the lighthouse stood abandoned, just like Jessica felt. Decommissioned 3 years ago when automated navigation systems had rendered human lighthouse keepers obsolete. The once proud structure had fallen into disrepair, its white paint peeling and windows boarded up. She picked up the framed photograph of Lily on her first day of school, her daughter's bright smile radiating hope that Jessica was struggling to maintain. "What am I going to do now, baby girl?" she asked the silent image, grateful that Lily was still at school and couldn't see her moment of despair. That night, after putting Lily to bed with reassurances that everything would be okay, Jessica opened her laptop and began the desperate search for affordable housing. The numbers on the screen mocked her efforts. Studio apartments rented for nearly twice what she currently paid for her 2-bedroom. Application fees alone would quickly deplete what remained of her savings. Every listing demanded proof of income 3 times the monthly rent, impossible without a steady job. She expanded her search radius, looking at towns farther inland, places with longer commutes to potential jobs, areas with higher crime rates, anywhere that might have something, anything she could afford. Each option seemed worse than the last. By 1:28 a.m., desperation drove her to search bankruptcy auctions, Foreclosed properties, abandoned buildings, distressed real estate being liquidated to recoup debts. Most were dilapidated houses requiring massive renovations or vacant lots in remote areas. And then she saw it. Former Crescent Point Lighthouse and Keeper Quarters. Minimum bid $1. Sold as is. Condemned structure. Jessica almost scrolled past it. What would she do with a condemned lighthouse? But something made her click on the listing. There were only 4 photos. The weathered lighthouse tower with its faded white paint and rusted metalwork. The attached keeper quarters with boarded windows, the crumbling stone foundation, and an aerial view showing the property on a rocky promontory extending into the harbor. The description was sparse. Former Crescent Point Lighthouse plus 1,100 square feet keeper quarters. Property condemned by county safety inspectors. Structure requires complete renovation. No utilities currently connected. Property sold as is. All sales final. Successful bidder assumes all liability. Jessica's exhausted mind began to calculate improbable possibilities. The keeper's quarters could potentially be made livable with enough work. The condemnation order might be overcome with proper repairs. The property would be hers outright, eliminating the perpetual vulnerability of renting. It was insane. She was a former elementary school teacher, not a contractor or structural engineer. The property was isolated, accessible only by a narrow causeway that flooded during high tides. And yet, what if this was her only option? What if $1, literally the last dollar she could spare, was the price of never having to worry about a landlord's whims again? This is absolutely crazy, she told herself, closing the laptop. But as she lay in bed listening to the waves crash against the shore, the idea refused to fade. The auction was tomorrow. Perhaps the universe was offering an unlikely path forward when all conventional options had disappeared. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By morning, what had seemed like midnight madness had crystallized into Jessica's best, perhaps only option for housing security. She withdrew the last dollar from her account, packed Lily off to school with an extra tight hug, and drove her aging Honda Civic to the county courthouse. Rehearsing arguments to convince herself this wasn't the most desperate gamble of her life. The county courthouse was an imposing granite building with wide stone steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Jessica arrived 20 minutes early, clutching her bitter registration papers and trying to look more confident than she felt. The auction room was already half filled with people in business attire, professional investors and developers, who did this regularly. "First auction?" asked a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, noticing Jessica nervously adjusting her bitter paddle. Jessica nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "We all start somewhere," the woman said, introducing herself as Eleanor Simmons. "Been attending these auctions for over 20 years. Looking for anything specific today?" "Actually, yes," Jessica admitted. "The old Crescent Point Lighthouse." Eleanor's eyebrows rose. "Interesting choice. That property's been on and off the auction block 3 times. Nobody wants to tackle the liability of a condemned structure." "I'm planning to restore it," Jessica said, then quickly added, "starting with the keeper's quarters, of course. Make it a home for my daughter and me." Instead of laughing, Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Makes more sense than you might think. That property has stood against Pacific storms for over a century. The foundation is solid granite. The condemnation order is mainly about the electrical system and some structural issues in the tower itself. The keeper's quarters could be made habitable with focused work." "I'm a teacher, was a teacher," Jessica said, "with some basic renovation skills from helping my dad with projects growing up. I know it's unconventional, but I'm out of conventional options." "Unconventional is how preservation happens," Eleanor interrupted. "And between us, I doubt you'll have much competition for that property. Most developers want quick flips in residential neighborhoods, not long-term projects with historical complications and access challenges. Eleanor's prediction proved accurate. When Lot 17, Crescent Point Lighthouse, came up for auction, the room remained quiet after the auctioneer announced the minimum bid of $1. Jessica raised her paddle, heart hammering in her chest. $1 from bidder number 23, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear $2? The room remained silent. Jessica felt sweat beading on her forehead. $1 going once, going twice. The auctioneer scanned the room. Sold to bidder number 23 for $1. The sharp crack of the gavel made Jessica jump. Had that really just happened? Had she actually purchased a lighthouse for less than the cost of a cup of coffee? The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and transaction processing. The county clerk explained that the property had been abandoned for nearly 5 years, with property taxes unpaid since the Coast Guard had decommissioned it. The county had tried to find preservation partners, but the condemned status and remote location had deterred potential buyers. Interested in the history? The clerk asked, handing Jessica a thin folder. These are the original blueprints and some historical photographs. You'll need to file for historical preservation tax credits if you're planning to restore it. And you'll definitely need engineering assessments to address the condemnation order. By noon, Jessica Morgan, single mother, unemployed teacher, and now owner of a condemned lighthouse, clutched a set of keys and property deed in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Congratulations, Eleanor said, finding her in the courthouse hallway. That's quite an adventure you're embarking on. I'm still not sure if I'm brilliant or desperate, Jessica admitted. Sometimes those qualities are two sides of the same coin, Eleanor replied with a wink. Here's my card. I've renovated several historical properties over the years, including an old Coast Guard station. Call me if you need advice or contractor recommendations. Jessica thanked her and headed directly to her car. She couldn't wait to see her property up close, before picking up Lily from school. The drive took her along increasingly narrow coastal roads until she reached the causeway, leading to Crescent Point Lighthouse. The tide was low, allowing safe passage along the narrow strip of land connecting the lighthouse to the mainland. The limestone tower stood starkly against the blue sky, its white paint weathered, but still visible, the glass lantern room at the top reflecting sunlight like a beacon. The attached keeper's quarters was a 2-story stone building that matched the tower, with a steep roof and boarded windows facing the ocean. Using the key from the auction, Jessica unlocked the heavy wooden door to the keeper's quarters. The smell hit her first, the distinctive scent of abandonment. Salt, dust, and old wood. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating floating dust particles and casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The main living area was approximately 18 feet square, with a stone fireplace along one wall. Abandoned furniture remained: a dining table, chairs, a writing desk, and built-in shelving along the walls. A narrow hallway led to what had been the kitchen, a small room with an ancient cast-iron stove, a sink with a hand pump, and open shelving along the walls. A steep staircase led to the second floor, which contained 2 bedrooms with iron bed frames still in place, and a small bathroom with a clawfoot tub and pedestal sink. A door at the back of the lower hallway connected the quarters to the lighthouse tower itself, where a spiral staircase wound upward to the lantern room, 76 steps that Jessica counted as she climbed carefully, testing each metal step before trusting it with her full weight. The lantern room at the top took her breath away, not just from the climb, but from the panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. The lighthouse lens had been removed when it was decommissioned, but the metal framework remained, along with the rotation mechanism that had once turned the light. As a teacher, Jessica assessed the space with a practical eye. The structure, despite the condemnation order, appeared fundamentally sound. The stone walls were solid. The wooden floors, while worn, weren't rotted through. The roof didn't show signs of major leakage. With careful planning and gradual improvements, this could indeed become a home eccentric, isolated, but hers. No landlord could ever again give her 2 weeks to uproot her life and her daughter's. She was examining the kitchen space, mentally converting it into a functional modern cooking area, when something caught her attention. The floor beneath the old refrigerator didn't look right. Most of the flooring was original hardwood, but this section appeared to be newer planking, installed perhaps 20 or 30 years ago. Curious, Jessica knelt and examined the floor more carefully. The planks here were fitted differently than the rest of the floor, with barely visible seams forming a rectangular outline approximately 3 feet by 4 feet. Pressing against different sections, she noticed one corner gave slightly under pressure. Jessica's teaching career had included units on American history, including lessons on the Cold War and civil defense. She knew that many coastal structures had been retrofitted during that era, some serving dual purposes as observation posts or emergency facilities. Could this lighthouse have had some strategic importance during those tense decades? Looking more closely at the floor section, Jessica noticed a small metal fitting near the corner that had given way under pressure. It appeared decorative at first glance, but didn't match any other fixtures in the room. Pressing it experimentally, she felt it give way under her touch. A soft click emanated from beneath the floor, and the rectangular section shifted upward slightly. Heart racing, Jessica grasped the edge of the raised section and pulled. The floor panel lifted on hidden hinges, revealing a metal ladder descending into darkness. Using the flashlight on her phone, she illuminated concrete walls and a floor about 8 feet below. A bunker of some kind concealed beneath the lighthouse keeper's quarters. The ladder was solidly constructed, each rung welded to the metal frame embedded in the concrete walls. Counting as she descended, Jessica reached the bottom after 8 rungs, finding herself in a room approximately 10 feet square with a low ceiling that forced her to stoop slightly. Unlike the abandoned living spaces above, this room showed signs of deliberate preservation. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, their surfaces free of the dust that covered everything upstairs. A military-style desk occupied the center, its surface protected by a plastic covering. Along another wall stood a series of metal lockers with combination locks, and in the corner, a ham radio setup with equipment that appeared decades old, but meticulously maintained. Jessica approached the desk first, carefully removing the plastic cover. Spread across the surface was a leather-bound journal with the presidential seal embossed on its cover. A folder marked Operation Bullion Contingency, stamped Top Secret, and a detailed map of what appeared to be an underground facility, with specific sections highlighted and annotated. Opening the journal with trembling hands, Jessica read the opening entry, January 20th, 1962. Today, I authorized Operation Bullion Contingency, a classified financial security measure unknown to Congress or the Federal Reserve. In the event of Soviet first strike capability or economic warfare, America must maintain a physical gold reserve beyond the official Fort Knox holdings. I have personally selected this and 2 other locations for the distribution of $300 million in gold. Reserves, approximately 270 metric tons at current valuation, to be held outside normal Treasury accounting and accessible only through the authentication protocols contained in this facility. May God grant that we never need to use these resources, but prudence demands we prepare for all contingencies. JFK. Jessica stared at the presidential signature, her mind struggling to process the implications. She had stumbled upon evidence of a secret gold reserve established during the height of the Cold War, apparently unknown to the public or even to most of the government itself. The journal continued with periodic entries, some in Kennedy's hand, others by subsequent presidents, documenting inspections and status updates on the hidden reserve. Moving to the filing cabinets, Jessica discovered they were unlocked. The first drawer contained folders organized by date, each holding detailed security protocols, access codes, and what appeared to be transportation schedules for rotating security personnel. The label on the drawer read Bullion Contingency Protocols, 1962 to 1975. The second cabinet contained similar materials for 1975 to 1999. While a third held what appeared to be maintenance logs and inventory verifications extending to 2007, when the entries abruptly stopped. All the materials were in remarkable condition, preserved in the climate-controlled environment of the sealed underground bunker. The metal lockers proved more challenging, their combination locks requiring specific codes that might be found in the documentation. Jessica made a mental note to return with more time to study the protocols, though she already understood the magnitude of what she had discovered. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. If the journal and documents were authentic, and the presidential seals, signatures, and detailed protocols certainly suggested they were, she had found information about a massive secret gold reserve that might still exist, unknown to the public and possibly even to current government officials. Given the abrupt end to verification logs in 2007, as Jessica carefully replaced the journal and documents on the desk, she noticed a framed photograph hanging on the wall near the ladder. The image showed a man in a Secret Service uniform standing in front of Crescent Point Lighthouse. The officer's stern expression contrasted with the pride evident in his posture, one hand resting on a leather-bound book similar to the presidential journal she had just examined. The inscription at the bottom read, Special Agent Thomas Calloway, Presidential Protection Detail, Western Financial Security Division, 1975. Jessica stared at the image, pieces falling into place in her mind. This lighthouse hadn't just been a navigational aid. It had served as a secret monitoring station for one of the most classified financial security operations in American history, a physical gold reserve established outside normal governmental oversight as a last resort contingency. During the Cold War, with growing excitement and trepidation, Jessica realized the implications of her discovery. These materials contained location details and access protocols for a gold reserve, potentially worth billions in today's valuation information that would be of immense interest to government agencies, financial institutions, and possibly less savory elements if word got out. As she carefully made her way back up the ladder and secured the hidden panel behind her, Jessica's mind raced with implications. Her $1 lighthouse hadn't just provided potential shelter. It had given her access to information that could reshape her financial future entirely if approached correctly. The sun was beginning to set as Jessica locked up her new property and returned to her car. As she drove back along the causeway, watching the lighthouse silhouette against the darkening sky in her rearview mirror, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before losing her job: hope, tinged with an undercurrent of fear about the responsibility she now carried. That night, after picking up Lily from her after-school program and preparing a simple dinner in their soon-to-be former apartment, Jessica researched Agent Thomas Calloway, finding limited but consistent information. A distinguished Secret Service career spanning 3 decades, significant contributions to presidential security protocols during the Cold War, and a reputation for absolute discretion and unwavering loyalty. After his retirement in 1995, public records showed he had purchased a property near Crescent Point, almost certainly the lighthouse where he had established his monitoring post for the secret gold reserve. The records indicated he had lived there until his death in 2007, explaining why the verification logs ended that year. Jessica's research shifted to current Treasury Department structures and federal financial oversight. The legal landscape was complex, with overlapping jurisdictions between the Treasury, Federal Reserve, Secret Service, and various intelligence agencies that might claim interest in a classified Cold War financial contingency plan. One thing became clear: she needed to be extremely careful about how she proceeded. The discovery in her lighthouse could attract attention from multiple directions, not all of it welcome or benevolent. Government agencies might assert classified status on the information. Financial speculators would be interested in any hint of undisclosed gold reserves. Foreign entities might see intelligence value in the security protocols. Her simple housing solution had suddenly become considerably more complicated. And yet, as she continued her research into the early morning hours, Jessica began to see how this discovery might provide her with options she hadn't previously imagined if she could navigate the dangerous waters ahead with both integrity and self-protection. The next morning, Jessica called Eleanor Simmons, the experienced renovator she'd met at the auction. Over coffee at a local diner, she shared her plans to restore the lighthouse keeper's quarters as her new home, carefully omitting any mention of her discovery beneath the kitchen. "The structure is actually in better shape than I expected," she explained, stirring her coffee nervously. "But I'll need guidance on addressing the condemnation order and bringing utilities back online." Eleanor was enthusiastic about the project. Historical properties like this have special grant programs available through preservation societies. The lighthouse's age and architectural significance make it eligible for funding that could offset much of your renovation costs. This was welcome news Jessica hadn't considered. How would I apply for these grants? The Pacific Coast Historical Society would be your first stop, Eleanor advised. Their director, Dr. Marcus Chun, specializes in maritime structures. I've worked with him on several lighthouse preservation projects. By afternoon, Jessica had an appointment with Dr. Chun for the following day and a list of potential contractors experienced with historical renovations. She also had a growing plan for how to approach her underground discovery. That evening, after putting Lily to bed with a story about a princess who lived in a lighthouse, Jessica returned to Crescent Point with basic supplies: battery-powered lanterns, a small propane heater, cleaning materials, and tools to better examine the hidden bunker and its contents. The tide was higher than during her previous visit, the causeway partially submerged, forcing her to time her crossing carefully between wave sets. Once inside, she made her way directly to the hidden panel, opening it more confidently this time and descending to the presidential monitoring station. With better lighting from her lanterns, the room revealed more details she had missed during her initial discovery. A small communications console in one corner held what appeared to be a secure telephone system, its components labeled with presidential seals and security classification markings. The radio equipment was more sophisticated than she had initially realized, with frequency bands labeled for direct communication with specific government facilities. Jessica carefully examined the presidential journal, reading entries that spanned from Kennedy through Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush, with the final entry dated April 1993 by President Clinton. After thorough review of Operation Bullion Contingency and consultation with Treasury, Secretary Benson, and Federal Reserve Chairman Greenspan, I have determined that this reserve should remain active but dormant. The post-Cold War security environment no longer justifies active rotation of personnel or regular physical verification. Agent Calloway will maintain monitoring responsibilities with annual status reports. The gold reserve locations remain classified at the highest level, with access protocols unchanged. Future administrations should reassess based on evolving financial and security considerations. This entry explained the shift from active verification to the more limited monitoring logs that continued until Calloway's death in 2007. The operation had been placed in a dormant status, but never officially terminated or the reserves recovered. The most intriguing folder was labeled Location Protocols, containing detailed maps of 3 separate facilities where the gold reserves had been distributed. Each location was identified only by a code name: granite, apparently the primary site, bedrock, and limestone. According to the inventory documentation, each site contained approximately 90 metric tons of gold, with exact bar counts, serial numbers, and purity certifications meticulously recorded. The granite facility appeared to be an abandoned mine complex in the Rocky Mountains, retrofitted with military-grade security systems. Bedrock was apparently located beneath a decommissioned military installation in the Nevada desert. Limestone was the most surprising, a series of reinforced chambers beneath a national monument, accessible only through maintenance tunnels unknown to the public. The access protocols were extraordinarily detailed, requiring specific authentication sequences, timed responses, and physical keys that were presumably stored in secure locations elsewhere. The documents indicated that full access required simultaneous authorization from multiple security points, a deliberate design to prevent any single individual from accessing the reserves independently. As Jessica carefully studied the location documents, she noticed something unusual about the verification logs. While routine inspections had stopped in 1993 after Clinton's decision, there were entries in Agent Calloway's handwriting documenting what he called perimeter assessments of the granite facility continuing through 2007. These weren't full verifications, but rather security checks ensuring the facility remained undisturbed. His final entry, dated just 2 weeks before his death, noted, "Granite perimeter secure. No indications of attempted access or surveillance. Security systems functional. Recommend full protocol verification, earliest opportunity." This suggested Calloway had been concerned enough to continue monitoring at least the primary location, despite the operation's dormant status. It also implied that he had expected someone to continue his work after him, succession plan that had apparently failed with his death. The realization that these massive gold reserves might have remained untouched and potentially forgotten by current authorities for 15 years since Calloway's death was staggering. If the presidential directive placing the operation in dormant status had never been reversed, and if Calloway had been the last person actively monitoring the sites, the reserves could still be exactly where they were placed in 1962, waiting for authorized recovery. As Jessica carefully returned the materials to their places, securing the bunker as she left, she realized the enormous responsibility she now carried. This wasn't just classified historical information, it was potentially actionable. Intelligence about billions in gold reserves that legally belonged to the United States government, but might have fallen through the cracks of institutional memory during administrative transitions. The causeway was nearly submerged when she left the lighthouse, her car's tires sending spray into the evening air as she carefully navigated the narrowing path to the mainland. The headlights caught the lighthouse tower in her rearview mirror, its silhouette now representing something far more complex than simple shelter. Jessica spent that night organizing her approach to the various aspects of her situation. The lighthouse renovation would proceed transparently, with proper permits and preservation grants. But the discovery of the Presidential Monitoring Station required more careful handling, beginning with verification of the information's authenticity before approaching appropriate authorities. Dr. Marcus Chun seemed the logical first step for the renovation aspects. As a respected academic in maritime preservation, he could provide guidance on the historical restoration without needing to know about the secret bunker. For the classified information, she would need to identify someone with appropriate security clearance and institutional integrity. No small challenge given the sensitive nature of the discovery. The following morning, Jessica met Dr. Chun at the Historical Society's offices in a converted waterfront building. The preservation expert was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his mid-40s, with a methodical manner and obvious passion for historical structures. "Eleanor speaks highly of your lighthouse project," Dr. Chun said after initial introductions. Crescent Point is an excellent example of early 20th century Pacific maritime architecture. The last comprehensive historical assessment was conducted in 1986, so we're quite interested in documenting its current condition. I'm committed to restoring it properly, Jessica replied, carefully selecting her next words. In fact, I've already discovered some interesting historical elements that weren't mentioned in the property listing. Dr. Chun's interest visibly heightened. That's often the case with these structures. What have you found? Jessica took a calculated risk. What appears to be a civil defense modification from the Cold War era, a reinforced room beneath the kitchen. I believe it might have historical significance and wanted to consult with an expert before proceeding with renovation that might affect it. The historian nodded thoughtfully. Many coastal structures were modified for observation or emergency communications during that period. The Historical Society would be interested in documenting any such features before renovation alters them. I'd welcome your expertise, Jessica said carefully. Perhaps you could visit the Lighthouse to make an initial assessment before we proceed with major structural work. Dr. Chun agreed readily to this approach, and they scheduled a visit for the following afternoon. As they finalized details, he offered unexpected information. You should know that your lighthouse has been of interest to several organizations over the years. The General Services Administration made inquiries about purchasing it from the Coast Guard before it was decommissioned, but the deal apparently fell through over historical preservation requirements. This revelation added another layer to Jessica's understanding. The GSs which managed government properties had potentially known about the monitoring station, but had been unable to secure the lighthouse. Now that it was privately owned, different rules would apply to anything discovered there. As Jessica left the meeting, her phone pinged with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, Thomas Wilson at treasury.gov. The message was brief. Regarding your purchase of Crescent Point Lighthouse, Treasury Department Historical Resources. Division would appreciate consultation regarding any materials of federal significance discovered on the property. Please call 202-555-0176 at your earliest convenience. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone had notified the Treasury Department about her meeting with Dr. Chun, or they had been monitoring property transfers and had only now connected her purchase with their interest in the lighthouse. Jessica decided not to respond immediately. She needed more information and a clearer strategy before engaging with an organization that might assert claims on her discovery. Instead, she focused on practical next steps for the lighthouse renovation. A local contractor recommended by Eleanor provided an initial assessment of the work required to address the condemnation order and make the keeper's quarters habitable. The electrical system needed complete replacement. The plumbing required significant work. Several structural supports in the tower needed reinforcement. But the living quarters themselves were fundamentally sound. The place has good bones, the contractor concluded. These old buildings were built to last. With the right approach, you could have the living quarters comfortable within 2 months. The tower would be a longer-term project. Jessica signed a preliminary agreement for the essential safety work, carefully budgeting her limited funds while awaiting word on grant applications. Eleanor had generously offered workspace in her home office for Jessica's ongoing job search and freelance curriculum development work, which was providing minimal but crucial income. That evening, after tucking Lily into bed, Jessica sat at her small kitchen table with a legal pad, weighing her options regarding the secret bunker. The Treasury Department's contact suggested at least some institutional awareness of the monitoring station's existence. But after 15 years of apparent neglect since Agent Calloway's death, what was the current status of Operation Bullion Contingency within the government? If she reported her discovery directly, would she be dismissed as delusional? Would her information be classified and suppressed without resolution? Would she face legal jeopardy for possessing classified information, even though she had acquired it legitimately through property ownership? Or could she leverage this discovery to secure her and Lily's future while ensuring the gold reserves were properly addressed according to law? The responsibility felt overwhelming. As a teacher, Jessica had always emphasized civic responsibility and ethical decision-making to her students. Now she faced a real-world test of those principles under extraordinary circumstances. After careful consideration, she developed a three-step approach. First, she would secure independent verification of the documentation's authenticity without revealing its full significance. Second, she would identify an appropriate government representative with both the authority and integrity to address the situation properly. And third, she would ensure legal protection for herself and Lily before making a full disclosure. The next day, Dr. Chun visited the lighthouse as scheduled. Jessica guided him through the keeper's quarters, discussing renovation plans and historical preservation approaches. When they reached the kitchen, she made a calculated decision to reveal a modified version of her discovery. "I found something unexpected during my initial inspection," she said, pressing the hidden panel to reveal the concealed staircase. Dr. Chun's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "A hidden basement? That's not in any of the lighthouse architectural records." "It appears to be a Cold War-era modification," Jessica explained, leading the way down the steps. "I think it might have been a civil defense monitoring station." She had carefully prepared the bunker before his arrival, removing the presidential journal, the operation files, and the location protocols. What remained were the communication equipment, the metal filing cabinets, now containing only maintenance logs with security classifications removed, and the general structure of the room. It appeared to be exactly what she had described, a civil defense monitoring station from the Cold War. But without the explosive revelations about secret gold reserves, Dr. Chen moved methodically around the room, examining the communication equipment with growing excitement. "This is fascinating. A completely preserved civil defense installation. The Historical Society would consider this a significant discovery." These monitoring stations were established along the coast during the height of Cold War tensions, but most were dismantled or repurposed decades ago. "That's why I wanted your assessment before proceeding with renovation," Jessica said. "I want to preserve its historical significance while making the lighthouse livable." Dr. Chun nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We could incorporate this into the historical preservation plan, potentially securing additional grant funding for proper restoration. With your permission, I'd like to bring in a specialist in Cold War-era communications to document the equipment." This aligned with Jessica's Hope's legitimate historical interest and potential funding without compromising the more sensitive aspects of her discovery. They discussed approaches to incorporating the bunker into the overall preservation plan while maintaining its historical integrity. After Dr. Chun departed with photographs and measurements of the modified bunker, Jessica turned her attention to the next phase of her plan, identifying the right government contact. The Treasury email had provided one potential avenue, but she wanted to approach this on her terms, not as a response to their inquiry. Through careful research, she identified Robert Garrison, the Inspector General of the Treasury Department, a position with both the security clearance to handle classified information and the institutional independence to address potentially uncomfortable discoveries about past operations. His office had a reputation for integrity in addressing whistleblower concerns and historical accounting discrepancies. Jessica drafted a carefully worded letter to Garrison, indicating she had discovered documents of potential historical and financial significance relating to a classified treasury operation from the Kennedy administration. During the renovation of her recently purchased lighthouse, she requested a confidential meeting to discuss the materials before making any formal disclosure, citing concerns about proper handling of potentially sensitive information. While awaiting a response, Jessica focused on creating a stable environment for Lily. Their eviction date was now just 1 week away. The lighthouse was not yet habitable, but Eleanor had generously offered her guest cottage as temporary, housing a small but comfortable space that would give them breathing room while the renovation proceeded. "You're not the first person to need a safe landing spot while restoring a historical property," Eleanor said when Jessica tried to express her gratitude. "I lived in my car for 2 weeks when I was renovating my first Victorian. Consider it paying forward." Jessica carefully prepared Lily for the transition, framing their move as an adventure rather than a crisis. Together they visited the lighthouse, with Jessica showing her daughter the spectacular views from the lantern room and the cozy spaces that would become their bedrooms. "We're going to be lighthouse keepers?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Something like that," Jessica smiled. "We're going to be the ones who save this lighthouse and make it special again." 3 days later, Jessica received a response from Inspector General Garrison's office, not an email, but a phone call from his executive assistant, requesting a meeting in 2 days at the federal building in the nearest major city. The formality of the response and the rapid timeline suggested her letter had triggered significant interest. The day before the scheduled meeting, Jessica was supervising the initial electrical work at the lighthouse when she noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked at the mainland end of the causeway. 2 men in suits stood beside it, observing the lighthouse through binoculars. Their positioning and appearance suggested federal agents conducting surveillance rather than casual tourists admiring the view. This uninvited interest confirmed Jessica's instinct to proceed carefully. Various government entities were converging on her lighthouse and its secrets before she had even made any formal disclosure. As the legitimate property owner, she had certain rights, but those rights would be tested against national security interests, Treasury Department claims, and potentially classified operational directives. Jessica instructed the electricians to continue their work while she drove back across the causeway. Instead of confronting the observers directly, she parked beside them and stepped out of her car with the property deed clearly visible in her hand. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm Jessica Morgan, the owner of Crescent Point Lighthouse. Is there something I can help you with?" The older of the 2 men seemed momentarily startled by her direct approach before recovering his professional demeanor. "Ms. Morgan, I'm Agent Daniels, Treasury Department. This is Agent Collins. We're conducting a routine assessment of formerly federal properties in the area." "Interesting," Jessica replied calmly. "I wasn't aware the lighthouse had ever been federal property. The Coast Guard transferred it directly to the county after decommissioning." Agent Daniels maintained his neutral expression. "Our interest is primarily historical. I understand you've discovered some Cold War-era modifications to the structure." So they already knew about her meeting with Dr. Chun, but apparently not the full extent of her discovery. The Historical Society is documenting what appears to be a civil defense installation. If the Treasury Department has historical information about the lighthouse, I'd welcome any documentation you could provide for the restoration project. This deliberate redirection, treating their obvious intelligence operation as a potential resource for her renovation, subtly shifted the dynamic. Agent Daniels exchanged a glance with his colleague. "We may have some relevant materials in our archives," he said finally. "I understand you're meeting with Inspector General Garrison tomorrow. Perhaps we can provide any historical documentation through his office." This confirmation that they knew about her scheduled meeting was intended to unsettle her, but Jessica maintained her composed demeanor. "That would be very helpful. I'm committed to historical accuracy in the restoration. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to the electricians before they electrocute themselves in that ancient wiring." As she returned to her car, Jessica felt their eyes following her. The exchange had confirmed several things. Multiple agencies or departments within the Treasury were interested in her lighthouse. They were monitoring her communications with government officials, and they had not yet determined exactly what she had discovered. Tomorrow's meeting with Inspector General Garrison would be critical. He might be her best chance at navigating this increasingly complex situation with both her legal rights and the national interest preserved. But she would need to be extremely careful about what she revealed and how she framed her discovery. As Jessica drove back across the causeway, she glanced in her rearview mirror to see the agents returning to their vehicle. The lighthouse stood silhouetted against the afternoon sky, its shadow stretching across the water, a shadow that now seemed to conceal far more than just an abandoned navigation aid and her hopes for a stable home. What had begun as a desperate bid for affordable housing had evolved into something far more complex, a high-stakes situation involving classified operations, forgotten gold reserves, and competing governmental interests. And at the center of it all was a single mother who had spent her last dollar on a lighthouse at a county auction. The federal building rose like a glass monolith against the morning sky, its reflective surfaces glinting in the sunlight as Jessica approached the entrance. She had dressed carefully for this meeting, professional, but not overly formal, a balance that projected competence without intimidation. The weight of the presidential journal in her shoulder bag felt disproportionate to its physical size. The responsibility it represented heavier with each step toward the security checkpoint. Jessica Morgan for Inspector General Garrison, 10:30 appointment, she told the security officer, handing over her driver's license. After clearing security and being escorted to the 11th floor, Jessica was shown into a conference room rather than a private office, a space designed for confidential discussions, but with room for multiple participants. This subtle deviation from her expectations heightened her awareness that this meeting might involve more people than just the Inspector General. She had barely settled into a chair when the door opened to admit three individuals. A tall, distinguished man with salt and pepper hair who introduced himself as Robert Garrison. A woman in her 50s with the sharp attentiveness of someone who had spent decades in intelligence work. And a younger man carrying a leather portfolio who was introduced simply as Mr. Evers from our historical division. Ms. Morgan, Garrison began after introductions, your letter suggested you've discovered materials relating to a classified Treasury operation from the Kennedy administration. I've brought Special Agent Kathleen Walsh and historical analyst James Evers to assist in evaluating whatever you found. Jessica noted the deliberate neutrality in his tone, neither dismissive nor overly interested, maintaining professional distance until he understood the situation better. She also noticed the digital recorder placed discreetly on the table, indicating this would be an official conversation. Thank you for meeting with me, Jessica began, carefully selecting her words. As I mentioned in my letter, I recently purchased Crescent Point Lighthouse through a county auction. During renovation, I discovered a hidden bunker beneath the keeper's quarters, containing what appears to be a monitoring station for something called Operation Bullion Contingency. She paused, gauging their reactions. Garrison maintained his neutral expression, but a flicker of recognition passed between Walsh and Evers, subtle but unmistakable. The materials I found include what appears to be a presidential journal with entries from Kennedy through Clinton, describing the establishment and maintenance of a secret gold reserve valued at approximately $300 million in 1962. Jessica removed the journal from her bag and placed it on the table, but didn't slide it toward them yet. Before proceeding further, I'd like to understand my legal position. I discovered these materials on property I legally own, but I recognize they may contain classified information of national significance. Garrison exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. Your legal position is unusual, Ms. Morgan. Classified materials remain government property regardless of where they're found, but the circumstances of discovery can affect how the situation is handled. He leaned forward slightly. May I ask why you approached the Inspector General's office rather than responding to the Treasury Department's direct contact? So they were coordinating across departments. Because I wanted an independent assessment from an oversight authority before engaging with operational divisions that might have institutional interests in how this is handled. This straightforward answer seemed to earn a small measure of respect from Garrison. Fair enough. What exactly are you hoping to achieve from this meeting? Jessica had rehearsed this moment carefully. 3 things. First, verification that what I found is authentic. Second, understanding the current status of Operation Bullion Contingency. And third, establishing a framework that respects both national interests and my rights as the property owner who discovered this information. Garrison studied her for a moment before turning to Evers. Mr. Evers, are you familiar with any operation by this name? The historical analyst cleared his throat. Operation Bullion Contingency appears in several heavily redacted documents from the Kennedy administration's contingency planning. It's listed among Cold War financial security measures, but details have remained classified. I've never seen operational documentation. Garrison turned to Agent Walsh. Kathleen? The operation falls under Legacy Treasury classification protocols, Walsh responded carefully. Its current status would be complicated. We would need to verify the authenticity of the materials before discussing operational details. Jessica recognized the professional caution in their responses, neither confirming nor denying specifics, but clearly indicating institutional awareness of the operation's existence. She slid the Presidential Journal across the table. This may help with verification. The journal contains entries from 6 presidents over a 30-year period, with what appear to be authentic signatures and security classification markers. As Evers carefully opened the journal, his professional composure slipped momentarily, eyes widening at the presidential seal and Kennedy's distinctive handwriting. He examined several pages with growing interest before looking up at his colleagues. The physical characteristics are consistent with presidential documentation from these periods. The classification markings follow correct evolution of protocols across administrations. And the signatures, he paused, match authenticated examples in our historical archives. Agent Walsh had been examining the journal over his shoulder. The operation parameters described here align with what limited information exists in secured Treasury records. This confirmation that they had some institutional knowledge of the operation was significant. Garrison's expression remained carefully neutral as he turned back to Jessica. Let's assume for the moment that what you've discovered is authentic. What else did you find beyond this journal? Detailed location protocols for 3 separate facilities where the gold reserves were distributed. Jessica answered truthfully. Access codes, security systems, and verification logs maintained by a Secret Service agent named Thomas Calloway until his death in 2007. At the mention of Calloway, Agent Walsh's professional mask slipped momentarily. Agent Calloway was a legend in the protective services. His disappearance from active protocols after 2007 created several administrative challenges. This was new information suggesting that Calloway's role had remained in active security systems even after his death, but without anyone to maintain them. The administrative gap Jessica had suspected was real. His final log entry recommended a full protocol verification, Jessica added, watching their reactions carefully. It appears that never happened. Garrison exchanged meaningful glances with his colleagues before making a decision. He turned off the digital recorder and leaned forward. Ms. Morgan, what you've discovered is indeed authentic, and it presents a significant situation for the Treasury Department. Operation Bullion Contingency was established as a classified financial security measure during the height of the Cold War. The reserves were distributed to 3 secure locations outside normal Treasury accounting. He paused, clearly weighing how much to reveal. After the Cold War ended, the operation was placed in dormant status rather than terminate a contingency against future financial crises. Agent Calloway maintained monitoring responsibilities until his death, after which there was an administrative transition gap. You lost track of $300 million in gold reserves, Jessica stated bluntly. Not lost, Agent Walsh corrected quickly. The general existence of the operation remained in classified records. But the specific access protocols, verification procedures, and exact location details were compartmentalized for security reasons. Agent Calloway maintained the only complete operational documentation outside secured facilities. Which I now have, Jessica noted. Which you now have, Garrison confirmed, his tone shifting to something more direct. Ms. Morgan, this places both you and the Treasury Department in an unprecedented situation. The information you possess would allow recovery of significant national assets, but it's also highly classified and potentially sensitive from both security and economic perspectives. Jessica had anticipated this moment, which is why I came to you before approaching anyone else. I want to do the right thing, but I also need to ensure my daughter's future is secure. That's understandable, Garrison replied, studying her with newfound respect. Most people who discover classified information either exploit it inappropriately or find themselves overwhelmed by government intervention. Your approach has been unusually thoughtful. He considered for a moment before continuing. The Treasury Department has procedures for compensating individuals who provide information leading to recovery of significant federal assets. Given the unique circumstances, I believe we could structure an appropriate arrangement that both serves national interests and recognizes your cooperation. Jessica leaned forward. What would that look like in practical terms? Agent Walsh stepped in. A formal consultant position with appropriate security clearance, compensation based on standard asset recovery guidelines, and legal protections regarding your discovery of classified information. Given the value involved, the compensation would be substantial. The implications were clear. Jessica wouldn't receive anything close to the full value of the gold reserves. But the finder's fee would still be significant. More importantly, a formal consultant role would provide legal protection rather than leaving her vulnerable to potential classification violations. And the Lighthouse? Jessica asked, her primary concern still the home she was creating for Lily. Would remain your property, Garrison confirmed. Though we would need to properly secure or relocate the classified materials in the bunker. This framework addressed Jessica's core concerns: legal protection, financial security, and retaining her new home. But there was another element that still troubled her. If Agent Calloway's documentation is the only complete operational record, and it's been 15 years since anyone verified the reserves, how can we be certain they're still intact? What if someone else figured this out before me? The three Treasury officials exchanged concerned glances. It was clearly a possibility they had already considered. That's precisely why your cooperation is so valuable, Garrison acknowledged. A full recovery operation would need to be mounted immediately with appropriate security protocols. Your information would be essential to that effort. Jessica made her decision. I'm willing to cooperate fully under the terms you've outlined. But I'd like the agreement in writing before sharing the location protocols or access codes. Garrison nodded approvingly. We can have formal documentation prepared by tomorrow. In the meantime, I'd suggest you not return to the bunker or discuss its contents with anyone. We'll need to establish proper security at the Lighthouse immediately. As they finalized next steps, Jessica felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at having navigated this first critical engagement, concern about the security implications of her discovery, and cautious hope about what this might mean for her and Lily's future. 3 hours later, Jessica picked up Lily from school, maintaining a calm exterior that belied the momentous meeting she'd just had. As they drove to Eleanor's guest cottage to continue their packing, Lily chattered excitedly about her day and their upcoming move to the Lighthouse. When can we sleep there, Mom? I want to count all the steps to the top and see if I can spot whales from the big window. Soon, sweetie, Jessica promised, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. The electricians are making it safe first, Then we need to fix the plumbing and heating. But it won't be long. Jessica had decided to maintain normal routines for Lily while the situation with Treasury developed. The security team Garrison had promised would be discreetly deployed to monitor the lighthouse, but would maintain a low profile to avoid alarming the community or drawing unwanted attention. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Jessica sat with Eleanor on the cottage porch, watching the distant flash of the automated navigation beacon that had replaced the lighthouse's original function. "You seem preoccupied," Eleanor observed, handing Jessica a cup of tea. "Renovation challenges getting to you." Jessica offered a careful smile. "Just trying to balance everything, the move, the restoration, finding stable work. Sometimes I wonder if I've taken on too much." Eleanor's weathered face creased with understanding. The most worthwhile journeys often begin with that exact thought. "When I started my first restoration project after my divorce, I cried myself to sleep every night for a week, convinced I'd made a catastrophic mistake." "What changed?" Jessica asked, genuinely curious. "I stopped thinking about everything at once. Instead of seeing an overwhelming project, I focused on today's task, this week's progress. Eventually, I realized that transformative change happens one small step at a time." The wisdom resonated with Jessica's current situation. The full implications of her discovery were indeed overwhelming secret government operations, billions in gold reserves, national security implications. But today's task had been manageable. Initiate proper contact, establish a framework for cooperation, ensure her rights were protected. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but she would face them the same way, one step at a time, with her daughter's future as her unwavering compass. "I think you're right," Jessica acknowledged. "When I focus on the end goal, a safe home for Lily, the steps in between seem more manageable." The next morning brought the formal agreement from Treasury, delivered by Agent Walsh personally to Eleanor's cottage. The document was more comprehensive than Jessica had expected, outlining her role as a special historical consultant to the Treasury Department, with specific provisions for compensation based on successful recovery of assets, security clearances, confidentiality requirements, and legal protections. The compensation structure was particularly noteworthy, a base consulting fee of $250,000, plus a recovery percentage that could potentially reach several $1 million depending on the current value and condition of the gold reserves. While far less than the total value of the assets, it represented financial security beyond anything Jessica had thought possible just days earlier. After carefully reviewing the agreement with the independent attorney Garrison had suggested and Treasury had paid for, Jessica signed the documents and was officially sworn in as a consultant, a surreal process that included fingerprinting, preliminary security clearance, and being issued a secure communication device. "The recovery operation is being prepared now," Agent Walsh explained as they finalized the paperwork. "We'll need you at the lighthouse tomorrow morning to provide the complete location protocols and access codes. A secure transport team will accompany Inspector Garrison to begin assessment of the primary site." Jessica's signature on the final document felt like a pivotal moment, the culmination of a journey that had begun with a desperate $1 bid at a county auction and led to a classified Treasury operation worth billions. But it also represented the beginning of something new, a path toward security and stability for her family, built on her courage to face an extraordinary situation with integrity and determination. Later that afternoon, Jessica supervised the electrical contractors completing their initial work at the lighthouse. The security team Garrison had promised was indeed discreetly deployed, 2 agents in unmarked vehicles monitoring the causeway, and another posing as a maintenance worker checking the surrounding grounds. As the contractors packed up for the day, Dr. Chun arrived for a scheduled follow-up on the historical preservation plan. Jessica maintained the agreed-upon cover story, discussing renovation approaches and preservation grants, while carefully avoiding any mention of tomorrow's classified operation. The Historical Society has approved an initial grant of $75,000 for the restoration, Dr. Chun announced as they reviewed the architectural plans, with potential for additional funding as the project progresses. Your lighthouse has generated significant interest in preservation circles. This legitimate preservation funding, combined with her Treasury compensation, would make the complete restoration possible, transforming the condemned structure into both a historical landmark and a comfortable home. The path forward was becoming clearer with each passing day. As evening approached, Jessica stood in what would become their living room, watching the sunset cast golden light through the newly repaired windows. The keeper's quarters were already showing signs of renewal: clean floors, patched walls, new wiring concealed behind restored historic fixtures. The framework of a home taking shape amid the renovation. Her phone buzzed with a text from the secure device provided by Treasury. Operation approved at highest level. Full team deployment tomorrow, 0800. Prepare for multi-site recovery assessment. The message's clinical efficiency belied the extraordinary situation it represented. Classified operation to recover hundreds of millions in forgotten gold reserves. Initiated because a single mother had been desperate enough to bid $1 on a condemned lighthouse. Jessica slipped the device back into her pocket and made her way up the spiral staircase to the lantern room at the top of the tower. From this vantage point, she could see Eleanor's cottage where Lily was having dinner, the causeway that connected the lighthouse to the mainland, and the vast Pacific stretching to the horizon. The elements of her new life coming together in a panorama that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. The lighthouse had been a desperate gamble, a last resort attempt to provide shelter when all conventional options had disappeared. Yet it had become so much more, not just a home, but a pivotal point of transformation, revealing opportunities where others saw only abandoned ruins. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Jessica thought about what she would tell Lily someday when the time was right. Not just about secret gold reserves and government operations, but about the more important lesson that our greatest challenges often conceal unexpected opportunities. That what appears to be an ending can actually be the beginning of something extraordinary, if we have the courage to take that first uncertain step. The lighthouse beacon had once guided ships through dangerous waters to safe harbor. Now, in an unexpected way, it was fulfilling that purpose again, guiding Jessica and Lily toward a future that had seemed impossible in the darkness of that eviction notice just 2 weeks ago. Tomorrow would bring a classified operation, government agents, and the first steps toward recovering long-forgotten national treasures. But tonight, in this moment of quiet reflection, Jessica simply allowed herself to acknowledge how far she had already come, from the brink of homelessness to the threshold of a new beginning, one that promised security, purpose, and a place to call home. Dawn broke over Crescent Point with bands of gold and crimson stretching across the horizon, fitting backdrop for what would unfold today. Jessica stood at the causeway entrance, watching the procession of unmarked government vehicles approach. She had spent the early morning hours preparing Lily for a special day with Eleanor, explaining that Mommy had important work at the lighthouse that wasn't safe for children. "Is it for making our house pretty?" Lily had asked sleepily as Jessica tucked her favorite stuffed dolphin beside her. "Something like that," Jessica had answered, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "It's helping us build our new life." Now, as Inspector General Garrison stepped from the lead vehicle, followed by Agent Walsh and a team of specialists in tactical gear, Jessica steeled herself for what promised to be an extraordinary day. The weight of the complete location protocols and access codes in her shoulder bag felt like both burden and opportunity, the key to unlocking a 60-year-old secret that could transform her family's future. "Ms. Morgan," Garrison greeted her with newfound respect. "Are you prepared to proceed?" Jessica nodded, gesturing toward the causeway. The tide's low, we have clear access for the next 6 hours. I've ensured the renovation contractors won't be on site today. The procession moved efficiently across the narrow land bridge. Vehicles parking at the base of the lighthouse where a mobile command center was quickly established. Technical specialists unloaded equipment while security personnel created a perimeter around the property. The operation had the practiced precision of long experience, each person moving with purpose and confidence. Inside the keeper's quarters, Jessica led Garrison, Walsh, and the technical team to the hidden panel in the kitchen floor. The bunker below had been secured overnight by Treasury agents, but remained exactly as she had discovered it. The presidential journal was only part of the documentation, Jessica explained as they descended the ladder. The complete operational materials are in the secured filing cabinets. For the next hour, Jessica worked alongside Treasury analysts, providing the combinations to locked cabinets and explaining the organization system Agent Calloway had maintained. The technical team methodically photographed and digitized every document, creating a comprehensive record before anything was moved. These location coordinates are remarkably precise, noted the lead analyst, examining the granite facility protocols. Agent Calloway's documentation includes geological surveys, structural reinforcement specifications, and complete security bypass sequences. This is extraordinary operational detail. Garrison and Walsh conferred quietly before turning to Jessica. We're ready to initiate the first site assessment. The primary facility, Granite, is approximately 6 hours from here by helicopter. We'd like you to accompany the advance team. This was unexpected. Jessica had anticipated providing the information, but not participating in the actual recovery operation. Why do you need me on site? Agent Walsh answered directly. The access protocols require specific sequential inputs that correspond to Calloway's verification methodology. You've studied his systems more thoroughly than our analysts have had time to. Your presence would significantly increase our chances of successful first attempt access. The implication was clear: time was critical now that the operation had been activated. Any delay increased security risks and potential for information leakage. What about my daughter? Jessica asked, her first priority unchanged despite the extraordinary circumstances. We've arranged appropriate security for her and your friend Eleanor, Garrison assured her. A protection detail has already been deployed, though they'll maintain civilian appearance to avoid alarming them. Jessica weighed the decision carefully. Being directly involved in the recovery operation went beyond her consultant agreement, but it also gave her greater oversight of how her discovery was handled and potentially strengthened her position regarding compensation. I'll need to speak with Eleanor and Lily first to explain my absence, she said finally. Of course, Garrison agreed. We'll arrange secure transport to their location and back. The helicopter departs in 90 minutes. The conversation with Eleanor was necessarily circumspect. Jessica explained only that she had been asked to consult on a government historical project related to the lighthouse, requiring overnight travel. Eleanor, with the wisdom of experience, seemed to intuit more than Jessica could say. Some restorations reveal more than just architectural history, she observed quietly, after promising to care for Lily. Whatever you found, I trust you to navigate it wisely. Saying goodbye to Lily was harder. Jessica knelt to her daughter's level, holding her small hands. I have to go on a special trip for just one night, sweetie. It's going to help us finish our lighthouse home faster. Is it a secret mission? Lily asked, her imagination transforming the situation into adventure rather than separation. Jessica smiled, grateful for children's resilience. Something like that. When I come back, we'll be one big step closer to moving into our lighthouse. Can you be my brave girl until then? Lily nodded solemnly, then threw her arms around Jessica's neck. I'll draw pictures of our lighthouse rooms so you remember exactly how they should look. With that promise and a final hug, Jessica rejoined the Treasury team. her resolve strengthened by the reminder of why she had embarked on this improbable journey, not for gold or government secrets, but for the stability and security her daughter deserved. The helicopter journey over the Cascade Range was breathtaking snow-capped peaks, giving way to dense forests and finally the rugged terrain of the northern Rockies. Jessica sat beside Agent Walsh, reviewing the granite facility protocols as the technical team made final preparations for the site assessment. The facility was constructed inside an abandoned mining complex, Walsh explained, indicating topographical maps. Officially closed in 1958 due to depleted ore, but secretly retrofitted by military engineers between 1959 and 1961. Perfect cover for bringing in specialized equipment without raising suspicions. How was it maintained all these years? Jessica asked, genuinely curious about the logistics of such a long-term secret operation. Classified budget allocations through multiple agencies, Walsh answered. On paper, it remained an environmental monitoring site for mining runoff. Annual maintenance conducted by cleared personnel operating under environmental protection covers. After 1993, when the operation went dormant, minimal monitoring continued under Callaway's direction. As the helicopter approached the designated landing zone, a small clearing 3 miles from the facility entrance, Jessica observed the advanced security team already in position, having arrived hours earlier to secure the perimeter. The site itself was unremarkable at first glance, a weathered metal gate set into the mountainside, bearing faded warnings about mining hazards and private property restrictions. No indication of the extraordinary contents concealed within. The technical team moved efficiently, establishing communications with the command center and deploying specialized equipment to verify the access points described in Callaway's documentation. Jessica worked alongside the lead technician, correlating the physical location with the detailed diagrams she had studied. Here, she indicated, pointing to what appeared to be a standard padlock on the entry gate. According to Callaway's notes, this isn't actually a lock, it's an authentication terminal disguised as period-appropriate hardware. The technician examined the mechanism with specialized equipment. She's right. This has an embedded authentication system that wouldn't have been detectable with technology available when it was installed. Ingenious camouflage. Jessica provided the initial access sequence from Callaway's protocols, a series of rotational movements that mimicked normal key operation, but actually engaged the hidden authentication system. The lock mechanism responded with a barely audible electronic tone, and indicators on the technician's equipment confirmed the first security layer had been bypassed. Secondary authentication required, the technician announced, consulting the protocols. Voice pattern analysis combined with coded passphrase. This was where Callaway's detailed documentation proved invaluable. He had included the exact phonetic patterns required, not just the words themselves, but the precise cadence and tonal qualities needed to satisfy the voice authentication system. Following the protocols, Jessica spoke the passphrase into the microphone. Weathered granite stands against all storms, using the careful inflection Callaway had documented. The gate mechanism responded with a series of mechanical sounds as massive internal bolts retracted. For the first time in 15 years, the entrance to Granite facility opened. What followed was a carefully choreographed security assessment as the team methodically cleared each section of the entrance tunnel, verifying against Callaway's documentation before proceeding deeper into the facility. The air inside was surprisingly fresh, indicating the environmental systems had continued functioning despite years without maintenance, a testament to the engineering foresight of those who had constructed this secret vault. After clearing the half-mile entrance tunnel, they reached the main security door, a massive steel barrier that would have seemed more appropriate in a missile silo than a financial storage facility. This required the most complex authentication sequence, multiple simultaneous inputs, timed responses, and physical keys that Callaway had documented in extraordinary detail. The technical team worked with practiced efficiency, each specialist handling a specific component of the authentication process. Jessica's role was coordinating the sequence timing based on Callaway's meticulous notes, ensuring each element activated in precisely the correct order. As the final sequence completed, the massive door began to move, revealing the extraordinary secret it had protected for over 60 years. The main vault chamber was larger than Jessica had expected, approximately 50 feet square with a 30-foot ceiling. The walls were lined with specialized storage units, each secured behind bulletproof glass and individual security systems. The center of the room contained a raised platform with monitoring equipment and verification stations. And there, arranged in meticulously organized sections, was the gold reserve stacks of standard Treasury gold bars, each weighing approximately 27.5 pounds, organized in precision-aligned rows. According to Callaway's inventory, this single facility contained approximately 90 metric tons, 1/3 of the total bullion contingency reserve. The technical team moved immediately to verification procedures, comparing bar serial numbers against Callaway's documentation and conducting preliminary purity tests. Jessica stood at the entrance, momentarily overwhelmed by the tangible reality of what she had helped uncover, not just historical documents or security protocols, but physical assets of extraordinary value, preserved exactly as described in the Presidential Journal. Agent Walsh joined her, equally affected by the scene. Initial assessments indicate complete inventory integrity. No evidence of unauthorized access or tampering. Callaway's security measures held despite the administrative gap. Jessica nodded, processing the implications. What's the current value? At today's gold prices? This facility alone contains approximately $6.3 billion in gold reserves. The three facilities combined would approach $19 billion. The figure was staggering, far beyond $300 million valuation from 1,962. Even the small percentage Jessica would receive as recovery compensation represented financial security beyond anything she had imagined possible. As the verification team continued their work, Garrison approached with a satellite phone. Washington is requesting a direct briefing. The Treasury Secretary and National Security Advisor are on a secure conference line. The next hour passed in a blur of technical reports, security assessments, and strategic planning as the highest levels of government absorbed the implications of rediscovering this massive off-books gold reserve. Jessica observed the careful diplomacy as Garrison explained her role in the discovery and recovery, establishing her legitimate position in the operation, rather than allowing her to be marginalized now that the gold had been located. When the call concluded, Garrison turned to Jessica with newfound respect. The Secretary specifically acknowledged your contribution. They're authorizing immediate verification operations at all three facilities, with enhanced compensation terms for your continued assistance. This was more than Jessica had hoped for, not just recognition, but expanded terms that would further secure her future. The recovery operation was already exceeding the best-case scenarios she had allowed herself to imagine. As the technical team secured the facility for ongoing assessment, preparing for the arrival of additional specialists who would catalog and verify every aspect of the reserve, Jessica stepped outside to gather her thoughts. The mountain air was crisp and clean, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the clearing. She found a quiet spot overlooking the valley below and took a moment to process everything that had happened since she first opened that hidden panel in her lighthouse kitchen. In less than 2 weeks, her life had transformed from the brink of homelessness to participating in a multi-billion-dollar classified recovery operation, a journey so improbable it would have seemed like fantasy if she weren't living it. Agent Walsh joined her, offering a bottle of water and a respectful distance. "Quite a view," she observed, gesturing toward the mountains. Seems fitting for contemplating extraordinary circumstances. Jessica accepted the water with a grateful nod. I keep thinking about the chain of events that led here. If I hadn't lost my teaching position. If the apartment complex hadn't been sold. If I hadn't been desperate enough to bid on a condemned lighthouse. Life's pivotal moments often appear as misfortunes when we're experiencing them, Walsh noted. It's only in retrospect that we see how necessary they were to reach unexpected destinations. The observation resonated with Jessica's own reflections. I just wanted a stable home for my daughter. I never imagined it would lead to this. That's often how the most significant discoveries happen, not through deliberate seeking, but through necessity and openness to unexpected possibilities. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes before Walsh spoke again. The helicopter will return in an hour to transport the advance team back to Command Center. The Secretary has requested your presence at tomorrow's briefing on the overall recovery operation. What about the other facilities? Jessica asked. Do they need my assistance with access protocols? Secondary teams are being deployed with the documentation you provided. Unless they encounter complications, your direct involvement won't be necessary. Your primary contribution has already been made identifying and accessing the main facility. As the sun began to set, casting the mountains in deepening shades of purple and gold, Jessica found herself reflecting on Eleanor's wisdom about transformative journeys happening one step at a time. What had begun with a desperate $1 bid had led her here, to a mountaintop as the sun set on one chapter of her life and rose on something entirely new. The following morning brought Jessica back to the lighthouse, where the command center had evolved into the coordination hub for a national operation now involving 3 separate recovery teams at facilities across the country. Preliminary reports indicated all 3 gold repositories remained intact, a 60-year-old secret, preserved through careful planning and exceptional security protocols. In a secure conference room established in what would eventually become her living room, Jessica participated in a video briefing with the Treasury Secretary, Director of National Intelligence, and Federal Reserve Chairman. The gravity of the operation was reflected in their serious expressions and the weight they gave to her account of discovering Agent Calloway's documentation. Ms. Morgan, the Treasury Secretary addressed her directly, your cooperation has facilitated the recovery of significant national assets that might otherwise have remained lost to institutional memory. The President has been briefed on the operation and has authorized me to express his personal gratitude. This official recognition, coming from the highest levels of government, carried meaning beyond the financial compensation. It validated Jessica's careful approach to an extraordinary situation, choosing ethical cooperation over exploitation or fear. As the briefing concluded, Inspector General Garrison presented Jessica with revised compensation documentation. The terms had indeed been enhanced, significantly increasing both her base consulting fee and the recovery percentage to reflect the full scope of the operation's success. The final figures will depend on complete verification of all 3 facilities, Garrison explained, but conservative estimates place your compensation between $7 and $9 million. The number was life-changing enough to completely restore the lighthouse to its former glory, while providing long-term security for both Jessica and Lily. More importantly, it represented fair recognition of her contribution rather than institutional minimization. There's something else, Garrison added, presenting a second document. The historical significance of Crescent Point Lighthouse has been officially recognized in light of its role in Operation Bullion Contingency. This establishes priority preservation status and dedicated funding for complete restoration as a historic landmark. This additional protection ensured the lighthouse would be preserved not just for Jessica's family, but for future generations, recognition of its unique place in a secret chapter of American history. As the government teams began the process of properly securing and ultimately removing the classified materials from the bunker, Jessica stepped outside to call Eleanor and Lily. confirming she would return to them by evening. The lighthouse stood proudly against the blue sky, its weathered exterior already showing signs of renewal where the initial restoration work had begun. 6 months later, Jessica stood in the fully restored lantern room at the top of Crescent Point Lighthouse, watching Lily carefully polish the brass railings surrounding the massive Fresnel lens that had been returned to its original position through a special arrangement with the Coast Guard Historical Division. "Is it shiny enough now, Mom?" Lily asked, her face serious with the responsibility of lighthouse keeping. "Perfect," Jessica assured her, adjusting the bow in her daughter's hair. "Just in time for our guests." The lighthouse that had once been condemned now stood fully restored, its white exterior gleaming in the sunlight. The keeper's quarters transformed into a comfortable home that honored both historical accuracy and modern comfort. Solar panels discreetly mounted on the outbuildings provided sustainable power, while carefully concealed modern systems ensured every convenience without compromising the historical integrity. The bunker beneath the kitchen had been properly secured and partially preserved as a historical exhibit, though the most sensitive materials had been transferred to appropriate government facilities. A small museum in what had once been a storage building now told the story of the lighthouse's long service to maritime safety, with carefully worded references to its special role in national security during the Cold War, the full details still classified but acknowledged. Jessica's financial compensation had been finalized at just over $8 million, enough to establish a secure foundation for their future while allowing her to create a charitable foundation supporting educational opportunities for children in underserved coastal communities. She had returned to teaching, not from necessity but from passion, accepting a position at Lily's school that allowed her to share her love of history with a new generation. As they descended the spiral staircase to prepare for the dedication ceremony, Jessica reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them here. The eviction notice that had once seemed like the end of everything had actually been the first page of an unexpected new chapter, one that had tested her courage, integrity, and determination before revealing opportunities beyond anything she could have imagined. The lighthouse that had been her desperate last resort had become not just a home but a symbol of transformation, a beacon illuminating the truth that our greatest challenges often contain within them the seeds of extraordinary possibilities. If we have the courage to take that first uncertain step when all conventional paths have disappeared. The guests began arriving across the causeway. Eleanor and Dr. Chun, Inspector General Garrison and Agent Walsh, now good friends despite their unusual introduction, local officials, historical society members, and neighbors from the coastal community that had embraced the lighthouse's restoration as a point of local pride. As Jessica welcomed them to what had once been a condemned structure purchased for $1, she caught Lily's eye across the room. Her daughter gave her a thumbs up before returning to her self-appointed role of tour guide, proudly showing visitors the historical photographs and carefully preserved artifacts that told the lighthouse's story. In that moment, Jessica recognized the most valuable discovery of all, not gold reserves or government secrets, but the resilience we find within ourselves when facing life's most daunting challenges. The lighthouse that had once guided ships through dangerous waters now stood as a different kind of beacon, illuminating the possibility of transformation when we refuse to surrender to circumstances that seem beyond our control. The single mother who had spent her last dollar on a condemned lighthouse had discovered not just a secret bunker with its extraordinary contents, but her own capacity to navigate uncharted waters with courage and integrity, creating not just shelter, but a legacy of strength her daughter would carry forward long after the story of Operation Bullion Contingency had faded into classified history. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.